Evans. I'm the trauma program manager at St. Luke's Anderson campus. I'm going to show you guys how I work with the DDR report out of HQ, specifically the registry DDR report, and kind of how I find some of my metrics. So after you download and export your DDR report into Excel, it should look something like this. One of the first things that I do is highlight these rows and delete them so that my headers are in row 1 of my Excel report. Then you can see that there are all of these green triangles in the top left corner of any cell that has a number in it. These things are called carets, and they have to be removed in order to pivot your data appropriately and get compliance metrics for your center. So you can see when you click on any of these boxes, there's this little hazard symbol that's next to it. And this is how you would convert that to an actual number. And you can see that it moves it from the left side of the cell over to the right side of the cell. Now, there is a shortcut way to remove all of the carets from this sheet in Excel. What you would do is you would click on one of these cells that has a caret. On your keyboard, you would hold down Control A. And what that's going to do is that's going to highlight all of the text that's in this specific sheet. Then you would click on this hazard symbol and hit Convert to Number. Now you can see it's going down the list and it is using, it's converting every number to, getting rid of all the carets and converting everything to a number, sorry. So the next thing that's really important with your DDR report is to orient yourself to what is available to you in the report. This report is the standard DDR report. However, I did delete columns that have our center and patient specific information that we wouldn't want to share out onto the internet. So what I like to do is scroll through and just orient myself to what kind of information is here in the spreadsheet. There's over 500 columns, so it's important to know what data is available to you and what each of the columns means. After I've done that, one of the first things that I do before I pivot it is I separate out the date and the time. So if you find the column that says the date and time that the patient arrived to the hospital, you'll see that the date and time are lumped together in one cell. And you can't pivot these because they won't group together since they're two separate things. So what we have to do is we have to insert two different columns. We're going to label one the arrival date and the other the arrival time. We're going to use two simple Excel formulas to separate out the date and time. For the date, you're going to click in the cell, the first cell, and you're going to say that this cell equals INT, open parentheses, and then you're going to click this cell next to it. And what that's going to do is that is going to pull out just the date. Now you'll see that when I hit enter, it gave me this random number. This isn't a date. That's because it doesn't recognize that this cell is supposed to be written in date format. So we have to go up here to our number section and we can click here and change it to short date. And then we validate that it's correct. So 9/9/2024, and yes, that's correct, 9/9/2024. Then if you click on this cell, the easy way to spread this formula all the way down is to take this bottom right corner where you have this little green square, and you're just going to drag it. And you can drag it all the way down to the bottom of that column. And then I always like to check, and yes, 12/8, 12/8. So the formula worked all the way through. For our time, we're going to use a little bit of a different formula, a little bit harder, but not too much. When you click on this cell, you're going to say that this cell equals MOD, open parentheses. You click on that same cell where you want to pull out the time, but then you have to put comma 1 and close the parentheses. That also is not going to give you a time because you have to tell Excel that you want this column to be in time. So I click on my number here to tell it how I want it to be set up. I go to time and I want it to be in military time. So I'm going to select the second one on this list. Now it tells me 9:42, which is accurate. This cell says 9:42 a.m. And I'm going to slide this down and slide it all the way down to the end. Now, nothing that we're going to talk about today is specifically going to use time, but that will be important when we talk about figuring out some of our other metrics that are important for our centers and monitoring. Now we are ready to create our pivot table. So if you scroll back over to your sheet and all the way up to the top, the best way to create a pivot table is to first highlight the entire sheet. You're going to click this little triangle between A and 1, then click Insert and Pivot Table. This is fine. You want it on a new worksheet, so you don't have to make any edits in this box that pops up. You're just going to click OK. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with a pivot table, I'm just going to orient you to it a little bit. So on the right side here is your main working pivot table fields. You have this box that has every single column title in that entire Excel spreadsheet. So it's really important to know what is available to you and what does each column mean and what data is in that column, so that when you're working in your pivot table, you know which fields you want to pull. You are able to search for different things in this box to help you narrow down where is a certain field to be able to quickly use it. Then there are these 4-box options on the pivot table that are going to be your main sources to use: filters, columns, rows, and values. Typically for values, I use last name of the patient, because you want something for values that every single person has. Now, since I've removed that patient identifying information, I'm going to use form status for our purposes today, because I know that every record that we're working with has a form status of complete. So today we're just going to be working with 192 records, just a small subset of patients so that it's not too overwhelming. And all of these cases are closed. So we know that the data should be complete on these records. So the first thing that we're going to do is we want to know how many patients are here per month for in this data set. So I'm going to find my arrival date that I created, and I'm going to pull that to rows. And you can see when we pull it to rows, it's going to give us September through December down the line, and it tells you how many patients are in this data sheet for each month. Now, if I want to see how many patients were each level of trauma activation, I want to look for the level of trauma alert. So I'm going to type alert into my search bar, and I find this field that says identify the initial level of alert that was called for the trauma patient. I want to move that to columns. What that's going to give me is this little table that shows me that in September, there were 6 patients that did not have any trauma alert, 3 first level, 26 second level, 2 third level, and 26 that were trauma consults. So this is a way so that you can easily know what patients were each level of activation each month. The other cool thing about this is that this is an easy way to find all of your highest level of trauma activations. So if these cases, I wanted to look at them or look at trends of mechanism or anything along those lines, I could double click right in my pivot table on these 22 first level of activations. And what it would do is it would pull me to these 22 patients. Then I could use the patient information, which has been removed from this spreadsheet, in order to look them up in my EMR or look them up in HQ if necessary, or just use them to look for mechanisms or ages or something along those lines of what had happened to these patients. Going back to our pivot table, there's also some nursing metrics that are very easily run through the pivot table. So the first one that we're going to look at is hourly vital signs on trauma alert patients. What we have to do for that is we only want our patients that were trauma alerts. So now instead of separating it out with rows and columns, we want to filter this data field to just be our patients that were trauma alerts. So I'm going to move this identify the initial level of alert to filters, and that's going to bring it up here outside of my data. I'm going to click this drop down, and I only want patients that are our first 3 levels of alert, because those are our 3 alerts that we have here at my hospital. Now you can see that we're down to 114 patients. Now we need to find the field that tells us this audit filter. So this is actually called, is there hourly documentation beginning with ED arrival on the record of the trauma patient? Doesn't say anything about vital signs in that header, which is why it's so important to know what is in your DDR report, what columns are there, so that you know which ones you're looking for to work with. I'm going to pull that to columns, and this is going to tell me the options of yes, no, and I have one patient that is blank. And that's because this patient was a direct admit. So they don't have anything in the box for hourly vital signs. So now I can see that in September, 3 patients didn't have hourly vital signs, 28 patients did have hourly vital signs. I want to remove this 1 from my percentages because it wouldn't be accurate to include it since it was a transfer in. So I only want the yeses and the nos. Now, once I have these, I want to give this to my ED team as a compliance metric. I want it to have a percentage. So Excel can easily calculate that for you by right-clicking on one of the numbers and selecting Show Value as percent of row total. That's going to read these metrics across and tell you that in September, we were 90% compliant with hourly vital signs, October was 86, November 92, etc. So this is a nice way for you to be able to trend your monthly compliance. We're going to do this same thing with our hourly neuro checks. So the first thing that's most important is to always unfilter if you add a filter. So I'm going to add back all of these patients that we had removed. Then I'm going to throw this back into the pot here because I want to find hourly neuro checks. So this one is called, is there sequential neurologic documentation? And sometimes I just write down some of the keywords so that it's easy for me to find, and eventually you just learn the ones that you're looking for. I'm going to pull that into columns. Now you can see I have some more options. I've got yes, no, head or spinal cord injury not present, and I still have that 1 direct admission. I want to remove the no head or spinal cord injury because this audit filter is just for those patients that do have a head or spinal cord injury. So I'm going to click this drop down and I'm going to unselect, and I'm going to select just my yeses and my nos. This is going to show me that in September we were 100% compliant. In October, we were 94% compliant. In November, 71. Whoa, what happened there? So say I want to review my non-compliant cases to see, was it a registry error, follow up, and let the team know that these cases were non-compliant. I can double click right on these non-compliant cases, and it'll show me that there were 2 patients that did not have hourly neuro checks. Now, that seems a little bit suspicious to me since they were trauma alerts. I'm concerned it might be a registry error, but that's something that I can investigate off of this report. After we look at neuro checks, and we're done with that, I'm going to unfilter, and I'm going to put that back. And I'm going to change this back from a percentage. I want it to go back to no calculation because now I want my volumes again. And I want every level of alert. I want patients that were not alerted either, because we're going to shift into the final disposition order for these patients. Where did they go? So the final disposition unit that was written for the patient to be discharged. This is going to be what level of care did the patient go to? Did they go home? Did they go to the ICU, IR, med surge? This can be important so that you know where your patient's going. You can find out your transfers, anything along those lines. I also might want to look at admitting service. So if I put this back, I'm going to find my admitting service. And here I can see how many patients were not admitted, how many were non-surgical, and how many were admitted to the trauma service. So if I'd like to see my non-surgical service admission percentage, I can remove those that were not admitted. And then you can see that in September, we had 7 out of 57 patients admitted to a non-surgical service. In October, 7 out of 72, etc. I can do the same method and click and right click on here to change this and show the values as a percentage. So you can see that in September, we had 12% admitted to a non-surgical service. October was 8, November was 12.5. So this is a way that we can trend that data over the months, over the quarters, however we wanted to split it up. If you wanted this data to be in quarters, what you could do is go up to the top, which is currently being blocked with my sharing my screen. Here it is. Sorry about that. So you can hit group selection and you can ask for it to be grouped in quarters if you'd like. Now you can see that I have Q3 and Q4. So if I wanted to share this information on a quarterly basis, I could easily do that. Again, by going to Pivot Table Analyze, and then I'm going to hit Group Selection. And I can either keep quarters, I could do years if I'm working with multiple years of data, or I could just keep it months and days. So after the patient is admitted, and we are going to keep the filter of just patients that are admitted. So I'm going to take admitting from columns. I'm going to move it over to filters. You can see that I just have patients that are admitted to a non-surgical or trauma service. Maybe I want to look and I want to see how many patients, what type of VTE prophylaxis did they have? So I could find the field type of first VTE prophylaxis administered to the patient. I'm going to move that to columns. And you can see that we had 75% in September that had Lovenox, 5% that had none, 14% that had heparin, etc. So this is a nice way to look and see what kind of VTE prophylaxis are you giving, especially if you're monitoring a certain population of patients to improve or reduce your use of. And I'm going to throw that back because I'm done with that. I'm going to change this back to count as we work through the next one, which is going to be our SBIRT screening compliance. So for SBIRT screening, I only want patients that are admitted. So I still have my filter on for those admitted to a non-surgical or trauma service. I'm going to look for patients that if a screening was complete, I want was a screen completed to evaluate for substance abuse. I'm going to move that to columns. So here you can see I have 4 options. I have yes, not applicable, no, and I have blank. What we need to do is we need to just have the yeses and the nos. Because not applicable means that they met some criteria that they did not need an SBIRT screening. So now here you can see my no's and my yeses. So in September, we had 51 patients that had a screening and 2 that did not have a screening. It's also really important to make sure that you're looking at the reason that SBIRT was not completed. So I like to put that into filters. And the reason why is because if the patient was non-participatory, they can't participate in the screening. So that's not counted as non-compliant. This would be a patient that maybe had a low GCS score and didn't meet that criteria. So I would want to uncheck that so that I'm only capturing the patients that really didn't have a documented attempt or we didn't know why they didn't do it. So here we are with our actual compliance. So now I can again change this over into my row total, and you can see that we've got 98% compliance in September, 94 in October, working our way down. Now that I know who's been screened, I want to look for the patients that had a positive screening and make sure that they had a brief intervention done. So I am going to now take my was a screening completed, and now I want to filter it because I don't want the no's. Because if you didn't have a screening, the screening couldn't have been positive. So I want to filter and just have the yeses. Then I want to look for the SBIRT screen result. And I'm going to filter that as well to just look for those patients that had a positive screening. Now I only have patients that were screened and have a positive result. I now want to look and see, was a brief intervention offered to these patients? So you can see in September, we had 2 patients and 1 did not have an SBIRT screening. That's something that I would investigate and make sure that the registry captured it appropriately. In October, we had 2, and in November, we had 1 patient that did not receive an SBIRT screening. So our compliance for this metric in this data set would be 50%, 100%, and 66%. I hope this was helpful to you. I do want to just show you how we would create a graph out of this information if you were not familiar with it. So I'm going to go back and I am going to do it with our SBIRT screening. So we're going to add back our filters. And we want to know, were these patients screened for substance abuse? And now here's our compliance that we had for each month. What I like to do is first, I like to create a new sheet in Excel and label that graphs. I'm going to copy over my compliance, put that here. And I'm going to copy over my months so that I don't have to type them in. I'm going to group and put the year so that we know that these months were in 2024. This is my SBIRT screening compliance. And I'm going to add a goal line of 80% since that's our established goal. After you have this data set up, it's very easy to highlight it, click insert, and then I want a line graph for this. So here you can see we've got our goal line, our SBIRT screening compliance. I would change this. And I would do a couple things to make it pretty. You can't be over 100% compliant, so I would remove that. I don't like the excessive decimal places. And I don't need you to tell me that it's a goal line. So this is how we can then take this and we can copy and paste this graph into Excel or send it in an email so that I could say, whoa, what's going on in December? However, I know there's only 4 patients in this data set for December, so chances are that number is not currently accurate for our center. If you guys have any questions about this video, please feel free to reach out to me, and I hope it was helpful.